I want to tell you about a Sunday afternoon in September. Not a special Sunday, not a holiday, not one of the Sundays that the calendar marks as significant. Just an ordinary September Sunday in the house where I grew up, in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a quiet street with oak trees that had been there longer than any of us. But it was the most important Sunday of my life, because it was the day the Mitchell family was in the same room for the first time in 11 years. 11 years is a long time to be broken, long enough for children to become teenagers, long enough for people you once knew completely to become strangers whose lives you follow in fragments, photographs posted online, news relayed through mutual acquaintances. The occasional sighting at a gas station or a grocery store that requires a rapid recalculation of which aisle you are in and whether the store is large enough for both of you to avoid the moment. Long enough for an argument, a real one, a significant one, the kind that doesn't start over nothing even if it eventually encompasses everything, to calcify from something hot and raw into something cold and architectural. Something that has been in place so long it feels like a wall rather than a wound. My name is Daniel Mitchell. I am 44 years old. I am the middle child between my older sister Patricia, who is 47, and my younger brother James, who is 41. We grew up in that house on that quiet street. We ate at that table. And we fought over the television and the bathroom and the last of the milk and all the ordinary resources of a shared childhood. And then we grew up, and something happened, and 11 years passed. And then our mother called each of us separately on a Tuesday in August and said something that made every one of us get in the car. This is the story of what she said, and of what happened when we arrived. I want to tell you how it happened. Not with blame, I am past blame, or mostly past it, but with the honesty that the story deserves. My father died when I was 33, a stroke, quick, as these things sometimes are, a mercy, people said, though I was never entirely sure what they meant by that. He was 69 years old. He had been a carpenter, a churchgoer, a man of few words and consistent presence, the kind of father whose love was demonstrated entirely through action, and who would have found the direct expression of feeling genuinely uncomfortable. We knew he loved us. We knew it the way you know things that have never been stated but are simply a fact of the world you live in. His death left 3 things. The first was grief, which was straightforward and real, and which we each handled in our own way. Patricia through organization and practicality, James through a retreat into himself that lasted longer than any of us acknowledged, and me through a quality of numbness that I later recognized as a form of protection. The second was the house. My parents' house, the one on the quiet street with the oak trees. My mother, Helen, was 66 at the time of my father's death and in good health and had no intention of leaving the house she had lived in for 38 years. But the question of what would eventually happen to it, who would inherit it, how it would be managed, what the plan was, arose in the charged and fragile weeks after the funeral before anyone was ready for it. The third thing my father left was a will that none of us had expected. I am not going to detail the will. Some things still belong to the family and not to a story. But I will tell you that it was not what any of us anticipated, that it created, in the weeks after the funeral, a sense of unfairness that was felt differently by each of the 3 of us, with different intensities, from different angles, and for different reasons that each had some validity and none had complete validity. What it created over the months that followed it was an argument, a real one, the kind that starts over something specific, the will, the house, the feeling of being treated unequally by someone who can no longer explain themselves, and ends somewhere much larger, somewhere that is less about the specific thing and more about the accumulated weight of a lifetime of smaller things that the specific thing has given permission to finally surface. Words were said that had been kept for years. Patricia said things to James that he did not forgive. James said things to me that I did not easily put down. I said things to Patricia that she received in a way I had not intended, but that I could not take back. And then, one by one, we stopped speaking. And not formally, not with a declaration, just the calls stopped. The visits stopped. The Christmas that year happened in 3 separate houses, and the next year, and the next. And by the time the arrangement had been in place long enough to feel normal, which took perhaps 3 years, we had each built lives in which the absence of the others was simply a feature of the landscape, not comfortable, not painless, but familiar in the way that long-established pain becomes familiar. Our mother held the middle. She spoke to all 3 of us separately. She never took sides, or if she did, she never showed it, which is its own remarkable feat. She had Christmas with each of us in rotation. She was the only thread that connected 3 lives that had otherwise entirely separated. And then, on a Tuesday in August, and 11 years after the funeral, she called each of us and said, "I have been diagnosed with cancer. It is serious. And before anything else happens, I need all 3 of you in my house at the same time. One afternoon. That is all I am asking. One afternoon." I drove to Charlotte from Nashville, 4 hours on the interstate with my wife Laura beside me and the windows down because it was a warm September and neither of us felt like air conditioning. Laura and I had been married for 9 years. She had come into my life 3 years after the fracture and had therefore never known the Mitchell family as a whole, only as my description of it, which I gave sparingly and imprecisely, and as my mother whom she loved and as the negative space where siblings should have been. And she drove the first 2 hours because she knew I was not in the right condition to drive without drifting. I sat in the passenger seat and I thought about Patricia and James. Patricia was the oldest, and she had always carried that position with the particular gravity of a firstborn who has understood from an early age that being first means being responsible. She was an attorney, family law specifically, which I had always found either deeply appropriate or deeply ironic. I could never decide which. She was precise and organized and gave her love in the form of assistance and planning. She was not always easy to feel close to, but she was always there when it mattered, or had been, before the fracture. James was the youngest, and he had always had the youngest child's particular combination of freedom and invisibility, and he had grown up slightly in the shadow of Patricia's competence and my middle child navigation, and had developed a quality of self-sufficiency that looked from outside like independence, and from inside, I suspected, was loneliness that had learned to manage itself. He taught history at a high school in Raleigh. He had 2 children whom I had never met. 2 children I had never met. My niece and nephew, who were 9 and 6 years old, and whom I had never held or spoken to or read to or been present for in any of the ways that uncles are present. That thought sat in the car with me for the entire 4 hours. When we reached the Charlotte city limits and the familiar landmarks of my childhood began to appear, the gas station, the church with the marquee that always had an unusually philosophical message, at the turn onto the street with the oak trees on Fayette, I reached over and took Laura's hand. She squeezed it without saying anything, which was exactly right. Patricia was already there when we arrived. She was standing in the kitchen helping my mother with something. Their voices audible before we opened the door, a familiar combination that hit me in the chest before I was ready for it. Patricia and my mother in a kitchen. The sound of it was something I had not heard in 11 years, and I had not known until I heard it that I had missed it. We embraced, Patricia and I. It was not the embrace of people who have been close. It was careful, slightly formal, the embrace of people who once were close and are holding the memory of that closeness without yet knowing whether the present has room for it. But it was real. And we looked at each other afterward the way you look at someone after a long time, doing the rapid inventory of change, the years visible in each other's faces. "You look well," she said. "So do you," I said, both of us meaning it. James arrived 20 minutes later with his wife Rachel and his children, Mia, who was 9 and had his eyes, and Cooper, who was 6, and who came through the door holding a drawing he had made for Grandma Helen and presented it to her with the complete, unself-conscious confidence of a 6-year-old who believes his grandmother is the most important person in any room. He was right about that. And my mother took the drawing and held it with both hands and looked at it for a long moment. And then she looked up at all of us, her 3 children and our partners and these grandchildren she had been seeing in rotation, in private, without the others present, and she said, "Thank you for coming, all of you." 3 words that held everything. Pause. 5 seconds. We sat down to lunch. I want to describe that lunch honestly, because it was not a movie reunion. It was not a scene of immediate, tearful reconciliation where years of distance dissolved in a single emotional moment. It was awkward, in the way of all real things that have been broken and are being carefully, tentatively handled. The first 20 minutes were careful. We talked about the drive, about the weather, about Cooper's drawing and what it depicted. A house. And he told us, with everyone inside it, which made my mother press her lips together in a way I recognized from my childhood as her expression for emotions too large for words. Patricia and James did not address each other directly for the first half hour. They spoke to my mother. They spoke to me. They orbited each other with the particular choreography of people in the same room who are not quite ready to face the center of the thing. And then Cooper, who was 6 and therefore magnificently unencumbered by the weight of 11 years, looked at James and then at Patricia and then at me and said, "Dad, how come I never saw these people before?" The table went quiet. James opened his mouth, and my mother said quietly and clearly from the head of the table, "Because grown-ups sometimes make mistakes, sweetheart. And sometimes it takes them a long time to fix them." Another quiet. And then Patricia said, to James, looking directly at him for the first time since he had arrived, "She's right. I made mistakes. I said things I can't take back, but I am sorry for them, for all of them." James looked at his plate for a moment, and then he looked up, and he said, "I know, me too." After lunch, the children went into the backyard. My mother's backyard had a large oak, different from the ones on the street. This one planted by my father the year I was born, now tall enough to shade the entire yard. Cooper and Mia found the remains of the rope swing that had been there since our own childhood, and began the project of determining whether it was still functional, which occupied them completely and blessedly. The adults stayed at the table. And we talked. Not about the will. That time had passed. Those decisions were made. The property had long since been resolved in ways that none of us were entirely satisfied with, and all of us had eventually accepted. But about the 11 years, about what the fracture had cost each of us, about the things we had missed. Patricia had missed my father's side of the family. The cousins she had not seen because seeing them meant navigating around James. She had missed the ease of calling someone who shared her history without having to explain the context. James had missed his children having cousins. He said this simply and without drama, and it landed on the table with considerable weight. His children had grown up without the cousins who were sitting in the backyard right now, at this moment, testing a rope swing. And that was something that could never be entirely recovered. And he knew it. And he had sat with that knowledge, he said, for most of the 11 years. I said that I had missed being known, not liked. I had people who liked me, but known in the specific way of people who share a beginning, who remember the same kitchen and the same table and the same parents, who have the full version of you rather than the curated adult version. My mother listened to all of it without speaking, and then she said something that I have carried since. She said, "I am not going to tell you that everything is fixed now. It isn't. You have 11 years of each other's lives that you don't know. The children have missed each other. There are things that cannot be undone. But I asked you here because I am sick and I do not know how much time I have, and I absolutely could not use whatever time remains watching my family be broken when it didn't have to be. The argument was real. The hurt was real. But you are my children, and you are each other's siblings, and that is also real, and it is worth more than the argument." She looked at each of us in turn. "So what I am asking you to do is to decide that it is, right now, at this table, not to forget what happened, not to pretend it didn't, but to decide that what you are to each other is worth the work of coming back." The backyard was full of the sound of children. Cooper had apparently succeeded in testing the rope swing and was reporting this to Mia with great satisfaction. We sat at the table for a long time, and then James reached across and put his hand on Patricia's. And Patricia, who does not cry easily, who I have seen cry perhaps 4 times in my life, put her face in her other hand. And I sat between them at the table where we had grown up, and I felt something I had not felt in 11 years. Whole. Healing is not a single afternoon. I want to be clear about that. What happened at my mother's table on that September Sunday was not the end of the process. It was the beginning. The permission to begin, which is different, and which we had needed someone to give us, because none of us was going to give it to ourselves. In the months that followed, and yet, we were imperfect. There were phone calls between Patricia and James that were uncomfortable, and where old resentments surfaced through the new goodwill and had to be set aside again with conscious effort. There was a Christmas, the first one together in 11 years, that was too loud and too crowded and slightly chaotic in the way of gatherings that are trying to hold too much and not quite managing and are beautiful anyway. There were moments where it was easier than I expected, where James and I fell back into the particular rhythm of brothers, teasing, shorthand, the specific humor of people who share the same references, in a way that felt startlingly natural, as if the 11 years had been a long pause rather than an ending. There were moments where it was harder than I expected, where something was said that opened an old wound rather than covering it and required careful and deliberate gentleness from all of us to address without letting it refracture what we were building. Mia and Cooper and Laura's and my children, our daughter Sophie and our son Ryan, met each other and were initially shy, and then gradually, over the course of a weekend visit, were not shy at all. Watching them become cousins to each other, watching that particular transformation happen, the walls coming down as it became clear that the other person was interesting and good, was one of the most healing things I have witnessed in my adult life. Children do not carry the weight of what the adults around them carry. They simply see each other. We could learn a great deal from that. My mother's illness progressed as serious illnesses do, not predictably, not kindly, but with the particular pace that required us to be present in a way the fracture had prevented. We took turns. Patricia organized the medical appointments with the precise competence that had always been her gift. James drove up from Raleigh on weekends, often bringing Mia and Cooper, whose presence in her house made our mother light up in a way that no treatment could replicate. I coordinated between them, the middle child, the position I had always occupied, now finding that the particular skills it had given me were exactly what was needed. We were a family, imperfect, unfinished, carrying the marks of 11 years of distance, but a family. My mother looked at us one evening, all three of us in her living room, our partners in various chairs, and the children on the floor with the television on and no one watching it. And she said, This is what I wanted. Nothing else. Just this. The karma in this story is not the punishment kind. There is no villain. The argument that fractured our family was real. Real grievances, real hurt, real things said that should not have been said, and real wounds that required real time to address. None of us behaved perfectly. None of us were entirely wrong. Most of us were entirely human. The karma is this: 11 years of a family broken, paid for by everyone it contained. Children who grew up without cousins. A mother who navigated 3 separate relationships with 3 children who would not be in the same room. A gathering of individual griefs that never had a shared space to become collective. That was the cost. And the reward, if reward is the right word, and I'm not sure it is, was what happened when we finally, imperfectly, chose to pay a different price. The price of discomfort and vulnerability, and the hard work of being in the same room with people who hurt you and whom you hurt, and finding that the love underneath all of it was still there. Dented, rearranged, but there. My mother passed away 14 months after that September Sunday. She passed in the spring, in her house, with all 3 of her children present, and her grandchildren nearby, and the oak tree in the backyard beginning to bud with the particular certainty of something that has been through many winters and intends to keep going. We held each other at the end, all 3 of us, together, in the same room. That is the karma, not the 11 years, and what came after them. I want to say something to the families that are broken right now, not the ones where the break is necessary, where safety or dignity required the distance, where the relationship was genuinely harmful and the separation is its own kind of healing. I am not speaking to those situations. They are real and they are valid and they require their own wisdom that is not mine to give. I am speaking to the families where the break was an argument, a real one, real hurt, real words, real damage, but an argument between people who underneath the damage still love each other, who are living in the cold of a distance that nobody officially chose but that everyone has been maintaining because nobody found the moment or the courage or the reason to stop. I want to say the moment can come from anywhere, and from a mother's phone call, from a 6-year-old's question at a lunch table, from a rope swing in a backyard and cousins who meet each other for the first time and immediately begin to be cousins as if no time had passed at all. The moment can come from anywhere, but it requires someone to be willing to be in the room, to drive the 4 hours, to sit at the table even when it is uncomfortable, to let the 6-year-old ask the question that the adults have been too proud or too hurt or too entrenched to ask themselves. Is it too late for your family? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Some fractures cannot be healed, and wisdom requires accepting that. But I know this. We believed ours could not be healed. For 11 years, we lived as if the break were permanent. And then a woman sat at the head of a table and asked us to choose differently. And we did. And it was not easy, and it was not perfect, and it did not give back the 11 years, but it gave us the 14 months that followed. And we were together for all of them. This has been Soul Tales. My name is Daniel. This Sunday, Patricia is driving down from Richmond. James is coming up from Raleigh. We are having lunch at the house, my mother's house, which belongs to all 3 of us now and which we have decided together to keep. Cooper wants to see if the rope swing is still working. It is. We checked. End.